How about now? There we go. Okay. Um, and we'll make sure to transition over so that we get the chat that we missed last time. All right. Um, First of all, welcome everybody. This morning to the this coding exercise where we are going to be writing. We're going to be writing code that you guys have probably seen. Some of you will be like, "What's going on? Why is this bad?" Some of you, the rest of you will be like, "Yeah, it's not so bad. Who knows?" Right? Yeah, it is. I've been to every NG comp since they started, and I'm looking into how I can attend this year. This year might be a little bit more difficult with it being in Salt Lake City. It was a lot easier for me to make it. But where I'm just starting a job tomorrow and I don't know what like traveling and stuff like that looks like. I don't really know what this year's NG Conf will look like. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Like I started going to NG Conf, the very first one when they were doing it for Angular JS. So um, yeah, I've seen a lot of the amazing talks in people in person in people met some amazing people at NG Conf. It's if you guys can make it, I highly recommend it. It's been a great conference. Yeah. Um, Taking the Amtrak here from Minnesota. If you take the train, you could basically work for 2 whole days on the train. That's true. That like and that's one of the things. So my job will be in downtown Salt Lake City. Um, if I take what they call front runner to go into work, um, it winds up being about an hour on the train. Um, but during that time, I can use the Wi-Fi and maybe do some work or whatever on the way into work, right? Um, if I drive, it winds up being about the same amount of time, depending on traffic and depending on the day. It could be more. Um, the way Salt Lake City traffic is anymore, it's probably not too much less than an hour. I mean, there might be times of the day where it is. Um, but during the commute times, it can take an hour, hour and a half to get from my house to downtown Salt Lake City. So I'd much rather sit on a train and, you know, work or do something, right? So great idea, Michael. Anyway, um, yeah, we're working towards the I don't know if it's going to be a presentation or a workshop or what. I think it'll probably wind up being more of a presentation that will include code to show what the improvements can be. Um, I also want to make use of Junie, um, which is built into well, it's not built into WebStorm. I think it was released for the general public recently. Um, but it understands things really, really well, right? Like, you guys may have seen this just before I started. Hey, create a service for a fake HTTP backend. The service will provide characters from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, includes things like high scores and the return data, right? Pretty generic. I didn't even tell it that we were using Angular, so it set up a plan, to set up a fake HTTP backend, and it figured out pretty quickly that we were using Angular. Um, where was it? Was it here? The project has been explored, revealing, yeah, related to Angular applications, right? So it figured out almost immediately that um, we are using Angular. Um, First time chat. Welcome to a timeout. Probably should just ban those people. I'm always, I don't know. I'm always, I don't want to ban people, um, but stuff like that I don't care about. Like I really I don't care about your stupid service to sell me views. Um, any so you know they figured out quickly that it was Angular. Then it started exploring the file directory and it figured out, hey, stuff's in the source. It found, you know, the app. It modified the app.config to add the HTTP client module. This is the piece that I may take out. I'm not sure yet, because we won't have a real HTTP backend, and maybe that's what we'll do. Is take that out, and then you know we've got all the Angular dependencies, so I didn't need to add anything to package JSON. Then it created the model, which I'm good with this model. I like this model. It'll be good for us. So you know that was good. Then it created the service, and I like that the service is, you know, written to be, you know, it uses the characters. And that's all cool. And then we've got, you know, a couple of different things. But the cool thing is that it is using observables right away. Right. So it's already writing RxJS code, which I really like. Then it modified my component, which I didn't ask it to do, but this was really nice of it to bring in this table. And then it wrote unit tests for me for the fake service. So we'll be exploring all of these files here in a second. But there was a lot of, shall we say, I don't know, busy work or stuff like that you know we didn't really have to worry about. So Junie was really nice from from the beginning. Let's go ahead and serve this. I'm really curious what it built for me. Where's my serve? There we go. So we'll go ahead and serve this project, and let's just see how well. And here we go. Right, we're kicking off the stream with some vibe coding. So, oh wow, here we go. So there's some weirdness going on here. Like this brown isn't really brown. Leonardo being blue, Donatello being purple is all cool. Way to go. Like, way to go, Junie. I'm actually really impressed by, this is not a bad, it's not a bad, you know, output. So poor Raph, only 8,900 high score. We'll mess around with some of this stuff and randomize it because there's some testing stuff I want to do with that. But this isn't a bad framework to get started with. I've thought about, you know, finding some images online or whatever, and maybe we'll do that. I don't know. But this is a good place to get started because it's going to give us the ability to write some bad. When I say bad code, I write some code that doesn't lead to optimal testing. Let's put it that way, right? And so we're in a good place to get started. Actually really like, oh wait. Okay, so the details actually works. What? What? No, you weren't supposed to do that much, Junie. Well, there we go. We've got most of the app. Most of the app was done through some vibe coding. Um, like I like to make fun of vibe coding, but this was pretty sweet. This is a good starting point. There was also some stuff that Junie did that I really like because it's going to lead to some interesting situations. Um, and so what we can do is we can potentially break parts of our application. The other thing I'm thinking about doing is I don't know, like this brown. We'll figure it out. Um, ninjutsu. Like this is pretty good stuff. I'm actually pretty impressed here. Um, that it was able to throw a bunch of this stuff together. Very cool. Um, you guys may have seen before I started the stream that NX run many tests. Right, our tests are broken. Um, and this leads to an interesting situation, right? Um, the reason our tests are broken is that we've got this NX welcome component that we removed from the app. And we need to fix that. But as it stands, I'm not hating this. I'm not hating what it gave us. Um, oh, look at this. Ugh. Ugh. So there is some stuff I hate, but that's okay. Right? Like the, this is this is hilarious. So we're grabbing the character color. We're putting white on top of that. This tailwind code looks like it was written by a React developer. Well, it probably had a lot of React examples to go from. And it may be better than Tailwind code that me as an Angular developer would write. Oh, there's some stuff here that I definitely would not do. So we'll be cleaning up after our poor vibe coder. Right, we threw the code to our poor intern. Our intern did the best that they could. They returned some code to us, and now it's time for us to go in and clean some stuff up. Um, but before we do that, let's get started, right? So we're gonna stage all these changes, and this is vibe coding, right? That's the best commit message that we could do here. Um, I expect to see stuff like, no, actually, I shouldn't even say something like that, right? Um, I don't even know what to do. Like, had the AI write some code for it? I don't know. Like, we'll leave it as is, right? We need to clean some of this stuff up. So one of the first things that we want to do is this. This is fine. This is fine. Um, So it goes down to one grid column. That's cool. So we've got a card, we've got a shadow. This NG style here. This works, and it actually works to our advantage because it's going to allow us to do some weird testing stuff, right? And their weapon and the high score. Great. Show details, which is awesome because this is going to allow us to do some other testing stuff. Like this whole badge thing, I love this. I love this because we can do some stuff here. Man, I never understand people who are like, I use AI to code now and I write code faster. I'm the opposite. Often I know what I need to do, and if I let the AI do this thing, it will slow me, show me the wrong stuff. I'll waste time correcting. Well, and that's so. I think that that's a sign of like developer maturity, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, even engineering maturity. If, from your point of view, all an engineer or a developer does is write code, then AI tools are absolutely going to speed you up and they're absolutely going to make you faster, right? Like for us to have generated all of this on stream probably would have taken 15 to 20 minutes, right? Maybe more. Because there would have been decisions to be made and things like that, right? Like I'm good with what we got. Where it breaks down is once you realize that your job as an engineer is not to create code, right? Your job as an engineer is to create a product that makes your users happy, right? And yeah, a lot of what we do is write code, right? But there's more to it than that. There's architectural decisions that need to be made, and wrong architectural decisions can lead to poor testing coverage. They can lead to difficult to maintain code. They can lead to patterns where code is copied and pasted all over the place, right? Because you're setting that precedent. AI is going to regurgitate what you give it, right? And so, you know, when we look at this, like for example, here, and here, I would have called this out in, you know, a code review. You know, that hey, you've got the same badge in two places. This works to our advantage, right? When we're doing testing, because we can break this now, which is what I intend to do, right? Having code in two places is one of the things I wanted to call out. And the fact that the AI generated code that does this for me is just, you know, chef's kiss, right? The AI is, somebody described like AI coding as like having a super eager junior developer who, you know, is very eager to please but doesn't know what they're doing right or wrong. And so this is, you know, the when we look at this stuff, that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at a junior developer who is very, very eager to please. Like this code is not bad code. You know, it works, it runs, and I was impressed with the output. But once you go in and you start investigating, right, this is code that's not going to be maintainable, right? Having the same badge in two places is not maintainable. Yeah, one of our corporate goals is AI tooling. I don't know, kind of good, kind of frustrating. Like, I love AI tooling. And I guess I need to be very, very clear here. I love having an AI there to help me. especially with like unit testing. Like if an AI catches on to what I'm doing with a unit test and is able to, you know, create like all of the structure that I need and help me, you know, blast through the unit test so I can focus on what I'm actually testing. Um, I'm way faster in that regard, right? When I'm actually writing code, there are a lot of times where I struggle with the AI, right? Because the AI, like I said, it's greedy, it's eager, it wants to please. But a lot of times, what it's doing is forcing me to shut off that critical thinking part of my brain, right? Like the AI will most likely generate code faster than I will. But my job is not to generate code. If my job was to generate code, I would be very worried about AIs, right? But that's not my job. My job is to generate a product that's easy to maintain, that's cheap for the company to maintain, right? The cost of ownership of the code that I produce should be less than, you know, the code that AI produces. If it's ever the case that AI produces code that's cheaper to own than the code that I produce, then we're in a problem. We're in a case where, you know, the AI has overcome us, right? Yeah, tooling as a goal, no matter what it is wild to me. Yeah, I still think we don't know what AI is good at versus bad at yet, but I kind of empathize with the directors who are pushing this down. There's there's a bit of corporate greed going on there, right? Um, and this is what worries me about the future, um, because there's, you know, we're kind of at a tipping point, I want to say. Um, and we could tip and go one way into, you know, the world is a better place because of AI. Everybody's happier. You know, things are so much better because of AI. The other way we could tip, and this is the way that I think, you know, there are a lot of people out there with their fingers trying to push us that way, is we could tip into kind of like a cyberpunk dystopia, right? What do I mean by that? Well, you know, if you looked at the world of cyberpunk, there's a huge divide between the haves and the have-nots, right? Um, there's a whole group of people who are just forgotten, um, and you know you know they can be murdered by people who work for corporations, and the police will look the other way, right? They live day to day on outdated tech. There's a lot of pain in their life. You know, living is not easy, um, but the corporations are set up to extract the maximum amount of money out of these people. And the people in this situation basically live day to day to give all of their money to the corporations, right? Um, I wish to be pushed more towards a CS:GO dystopia instead of cyberpunk, right? Yeah, that cyberpunk game has a lot of bugs when it came out. You know, the game had a lot of bugs, but it's not the game itself that I'm talking about, but more the universe that cyberpunk is built on top of, right? Um, and that's what worries me. Like, I don't want my children and my grandchildren growing up in a dystopia where, you know, corporations are extracting the maximum amount of value out of people. It's just not something that I want to be a part of. Yeah, but jokes aside, I think those days are more about the things you do instead of good code quality and good engineering. Yeah, nobody cares about the code anymore. That's why even vibe coding is a thing. And that's how can you go to vibe code a new app in Tailwind where your whole code base is in SCS? Yeah, right. Exactly. I don't hear anybody talking positively about vibe coding. There are people out there talking positively about vibe coding. And I will be honest, I am very impressed. Like, I'm calling it vibe coding just for the memes and right for the views and whatever. But I am very impressed by what Junie just did. Very impressed. Like, this is basically if I had a junior developer on my team right? And I needed to get this done. I would ask the junior developer, I would have to have given the junior developer more instruction than I gave Junie. Um, and it would have taken longer to get what I got, right? And this is the problem with I think a lot of AI coding and things like that in general. Um, One, when you start to rely heavily on your AI coding tools, you start to learn to turn off that critical thinking part of your brain, right? It's just faster for me to let the tool do its thing, right? I'm going to get done faster. I'm going to get through more points. I'm going to get more tickets done, right? And that is inherently the wrong way to look at your work, right? Your work is to create a product that's going to um, be cheap to maintain, right? And there are a lot of metrics that we can use for that. Yeah, too much work to implement as a side project. I'm already brain dead when I code normally without AI 10 hours. With AI, things will get even worse. Right. The other part of um, the other part of AI coding that I don't think we talk about enough, and this is the part that really scares me, is that AI coding is basically the top end of coding is growing, right? We don't have enough staff and senior staff engineers. We don't have enough principal engineers. We don't have enough architects, right? Um, but we're compressing all of the lower end, right? The junior developers are not getting a chance because everybody's like, well, AI can do that, right? Well, where did junior developers come from, right? Where do our senior developers, where do our staff developers, where do our architects come from? It comes from that pool that we're just compressing and compressing and compressing. If that pool disappears, then we're in a situation where do we get the people who understand the code, right, to be able to keep us on track? And that's a scary situation for me, right? Because no matter how good your coding assistant is, it doesn't understand architecture, right? Um, I was thinking about this the other day, where how much code does an AI coding tool actually delete, right? And I think AI coding tools, like the people who don't understand code and who don't understand applications, think AI coding tools are amazing because we can get really, really cheap work, right? It's cheaper than offshoring. It's somebody who can write code. Like I've been in discussions where I've heard people say we can write code 24/7, right? We can't do that right now, and silly things like that. Um, and again, it goes back to the flawed. It goes back to the flawed premise that when you hire a programmer, all they do is write code. Um, and that's the problem, right? We need more juniors who become seniors, right? Who become tech leads, who become staff, who become architects, right? Or, architects or staff or wherever they go, right? We need we need the pool at the bottom to be bigger so that the pool at the top stays healthy, right? Right now, we're massively expanding the pool at the top and just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking the lower end of the pool. Um, exactly. With AI, companies in general kind of avoid junior and intermediate developers. Yeah, you never see a listing anymore for a junior developer. Um, and when you do see a listing for a junior developer, like anytime, when I worked at Bill, we would list a junior developer. We would get 3,000 to 4,000 applications, right? Like it was crazy. And so, yeah, the state of the market and the ideas of software engineering is pretty bad. I want to share with you something. At least the big ones that pay well do. I'm in a team, and honestly, we do not hire juniors. Yeah, even though we ask for juniors, the people that we hired are just. I mean, I'm very amount of effort that they put into the job is so low. It's crazy. We just need a bit harder working people. I write to those senior guys who do barely any work and they don't even respond to me. Ugh, man, um, but don't get more done. Yeah, it's our industry is a bit messed up, and at the higher end, they're burning out their talent, um, right? And I've suffered from this myself, where just the sheer amount of things that you're asked to do and the sheer amount of things that you're asked to keep up with just become too much, right? And so you have to let things go. And what do you let go? Who knows, right? It really depends on the person. Um, but yeah, the industry is in a weird place, and I think a lot of people see AI as the solution to it. Um, and who knows? Maybe in 10 to 20 years, AI is the solution. Um, I don't know. I can't predict what AI will do, right? Like, I've been constantly surprised by what AI does. Um, but it will be interesting to see when AI starts taking on software architectural decisions, um, and things like that. That's where things will really start to get interesting. Hey, Ole, welcome to the stream, man. But yeah, it's like it's top of mind for everybody, right? But when you get down to it and you start looking at things, like if we look, even this is largely there's a whole bunch of duplicated code. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's difficult to maintain. It's just right. Like this code is not following best practices. It does what I asked it to do, right? But it doesn't follow the best practices. Um, and there's some other things here that I was super happy to see, right? So like even this card body here, um, if we look at this, this is almost the exact same thing here, right? Actually, it is. And now there's more to it, but it's almost the exact same thing. Um, so the AI isn't able to think critically about the code, and this is like when you want to differentiate yourself from somebody who can be replaced by AI, right? Um, it's going to be, oh my gosh. Sorry, I need to finish my thought before I. Oh wow. Um, the place where you're going to differentiate yourself from somebody who can be replaced by AI is in your ability to think critically about the code, right? Um, Somebody who just uses AI is going to churn out way more code than you. It's the reality of, um, it's just the reality, right? AI is amazing at producing code, right? Dota, you could absolutely use a card component here, uh, and the where things are going to start to differentiate and where companies that will probably survive the AI trends right now versus companies that in 5 to 10 years are going to find themselves in serious problems are the companies that recognize that critical thinking about the code is imperative now, right? Anybody can write code. That's not a problem. Um, well, and anybody can write code probably on the level of an AI at this point, right? Not at the speed, but at the same level. I would be willing to bet that anybody could do it, with enough training, right? Let's throw some caveats in there. Um, it's that critical thinking piece, right? Like here, when we look at this, um, we're doing a join in our template, right? this is bad, right? But this is the one that stopped me mid thought. This line 76, is like gold. This is, and I will tell you, I have seen this in multiple enterprise code bases, right? This is business logic. We've put it in the template. This becomes nearly impossible to test. Thank you, Junie. You made my workshop so much better. And this is where like the critical thinking piece comes into play, right? Because it's really, really easy to just, you know, like gloss over, right? And then stuff like this winds up in your code base, right? And why did Junie do this? Because the AI that it was trained on saw enough code that does this, right? And so this, you know, this backs up my claim that I've seen this in enterprise code bases. This probably exists all over in open source code bases, right? Like the data set that this was trained on, you know, whatever LLM Junie's using, thinks that this is perfectly okay to do. And what does this do? Well, once developers stop thinking critically, right? Well, I don't want to spin up the LLM, or the LLM costs me money, so let's go see what it did before. Oh, okay, copy paste. And now this code winds up all over the place, and this pattern winds up all over the place. And the reason it does is because it was allowed to exist at the time it was introduced. And once something exists in the code base, right? You know, what's the number one argument that developers make when talking about code? Consistency. I make that argument all the time, right? Like maybe the choice isn't the best, but the consistency is what matters, right? Being consistent with the code base so that as people read the code. So copying and pasting this is just code consistency, right? The main issue is that you were wrong, Jason. For the business people, for the people that make the decisions, they do not care about code quality. They do not understand it, and that is the point I'm making, right? The business people that pay for, right, that put together budgets to determine, you know, how big a department needs to be, to them, the appeal of AI way outstrips all of the downsides that I'm talking about. The problem is that AI appeal will probably allow your company to move on for the next 5 to 10 years. You will not start bleeding until 5 or 10 years down the road. And then people who understand the code are suddenly going to be very, very expensive because we've pushed everybody out of the system, right? So I totally agree with you here, Abradores. The people that make the decisions care more about the profit margin on writing code and less about the profit margin on maintaining the application. And those are two different things, right? You can produce code very, very cheaply, right? If you wanted to produce code as cheaply as possible, just go get a bunch of high school students, you know, pay them $25, $30 an hour to write code, and you'll get code, right? Still be more expensive than using AI, but you would get code, right? If writing code as cheaply as possible was your goal, you could do it. But right, the long-term viability of your product is not determined by how much code you can produce. I find the business often has too much control over the code direction, which is kind of natural. You're building it for them. Right, exactly. You're totally right there. This looks like normal Angular code to me. It's the framework that is bad. Never felt more proud to be a React developer. You go write your React, man. I don't care. If that's the tool you use, go ahead. You can't hurt my feelings, man. Like, you can't hurt me, man. Uh, I've seen companies build around $25 to $30 an hour college graduate. Works as well as you'd figure. The code base is a mess. The code mostly doesn't work, etc. Bro, hire me for $10 an hour. I will do it. Mid to senior front end code right there. And that's so, Abradores, you bring up a good point, and we're getting distracted today. But I think this is a healthy discussion to have as developers, right? And to understand as people who work in this industry. It's that race to the bottom, right? So me saying $20 to $30 an hour. The reason I picked that number was because that's an outrageous amount of money to pay somebody in high school in the U.S., right? So you would attract a ton of high school students who would come write code for you at that price. You don't even have to pay that price, right? That I just picked a high number on purpose, right? And to your point, Dodo, you're seeing high school, college graduates being paid that amount. I just picked a high number, but Abradores, you bring out another. It's the race to the bottom, right? When the short-term profit is maximized, you race to the bottom, right? Like Abradores, you're absolutely worth $10 an hour. You're worth more than $10 an hour as far as I'm concerned. But if you came to me and offered me $10 an hour as a business decision maker, hell yeah, right? But this is where AI is winning, because it's that race to the bottom. No matter how cheap the human gets, as soon as you amortize the cost of your AI over 10 to 20 developers, the AI, no human can beat the AI, right? And sheer volume of code produced, hours that it's willing to work, right? Like an AI is willing to work as long as you've got CPU power, right? And it's never going to take vacations. You don't have to provide healthcare in the US. You don't have to provide, there's all these things that you don't have to provide the AI, right? That race to the bottom is what's killing us, right? That short-term profit need. But it's the long term, and that's why thinking critically about your code is where you're definitely going to differentiate yourself. How do we keep our values as devs going forward? Good code, I guess. The way you keep your value and your values, right? Because your values are what make you valuable, right? Yeah, good code going forward. Participating in PRs, and MRs, right? Depending on, right, code reviews. Code reviews are where you're going to catch stuff like this, right? And you're going to stand your ground against code like this, right? And it's going to be painful. But companies that learn to value developers that are willing to think critically about the code and be like, yeah, you could do it that way, but here are the potential long-term effects, right? Now you're getting into some interesting areas, and the more I look at this, the more I love it. Like, this is the exact stuff I was looking to do, right? Here we've got public properties, right? And this one I love more than anything. Anything or null is, I love this. Because now you've introduced a null conditional. We can break our application by not handling this null conditional, right? Hey, Marcus, good to see you. Standing your ground is, refusing to turn off that critical thinking part of your brain. But here's the thing, and this is a bit of me preaching to the choir, right? The people who are willing to watch somebody write code on a Sunday are typically not the people who should be hearing this advice, right? Um, you guys care about your code, you care about your craft. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, right? Like I don't think I'm that entertaining of a person. I think it's your desire to learn to be better coders, right? Um, and that that's where you guys already have a bit of a leg up. Um, and it's going out there, and this is where as developers, we need to feel empowered to speak to the decision makers, right? Um, and we need to feel empowered to have that conversation that, yeah, this is cheaper right now. But if you want to be in a perpetual rewrite cycle, and if you want your application to perpetually be bogged down in, um, tech support issues, in, customer angriness, in, developer frustration and burnout, keep going this route. But if we want to write software that is going to be cheap for us to maintain, easy for us to change, we need to be thinking critically about things now, and we need to be treating AI as a helper, as a tool, and not as the end all be all. Yeah, exactly, Michael. Um, and there's so I've been in the industry a long time, right? And there's kind of this pendulum that swings back and forth. Um, and we're coming out of the pendulum was way over on the developers had power, right? And there are downsides to the developers having a lot of power too, right? For the business, for the software, right? Because as developers, we often get bogged down in, the code needs to be perfect and things like that, right? And what's in it for me? And the business is there to make money, and that's the one thing that we always need to recognize. Um, Regardless of what industry we're in, the business exists to make money, right? Um, and it has to. Like it's morally good for a business to make money, right? Because that business is providing jobs that feed people, that that help prop up the local economy. That right? There's a lot of moral reasons why a business should make money. The problem is that the pendulum is now swinging out of the developers having power, and it's going very, very strongly towards the business having power, right? And this is where we get into kind of the joke of the 80s, right? Like one of the big jokes about the 80s was the 80s was very business focused, and we could even say immoral time of um, in the US, right? Like I was very unaware of the rest of the world because I was pretty young during the 80s. But business excess in the 80s was pretty bad. Like you look at things like The Wolf of Wall Street and movies like that, right? That they're a little bit sensationalized, but not too much, right? Where they talk about, the cutthroat ruthlessness of the business. And that's where when we start to talk about you know um, there needs to be a morality to the business needs to see people as people and not as cogs in a machine, and not as things to be destroyed, right? um, and so there needs to be a balance, like when the pendulum is more towards the middle between the two extremes, right? Developers versus business, or anything versus the business. We tend to be in a much more healthy situation, right? And I don't know. philosophically, it's fascinating. Um, and it's a scary time to be in. It leads to all sorts of weird things. Um, but the good news is the pendulum's going to swing back the other way, right? As soon as the pendulum hits a point where, oh, this doesn't make sense, suddenly it's going to start being pushed the other way. And companies that push it the other way are going to start getting ahead, right? Like right now, everybody was in, oh, the developers are everything. And companies that were pushing it back the other way were getting ahead, right? Those companies recognizing that the pendulum needs to be more towards the middle, balanced between the two. And it doesn't need to be exactly in the center, right? Because every company's different, and it may need to sit one side or the other depending on various reasons. But the problem is, all of these companies that are constantly playing catch up watch these CEOs and businesses that are like, oh, they're doing better than us because they're pushing that pendulum back the other way. We need to get everybody in the office. We need to do that, right? Like, it's not that they're making informed decisions, it's that they're following the trend, right? And by doing that, they're pushing more and more momentum on the pendulum. And that pendulum is going to swing heavier and heavier and heavier towards the business side, right? Those companies that are going to get ahead are the ones that recognize, no, we don't want to push that far. We want to maintain, kind of that central area that's good for us. Eventually, the businesses are going to recognize, hey, wait, we went too far, but then that momentum is going to push back the other way. And that's, that's why I like to call it a pendulum, because you've always got these companies that are always chasing thought leaders, right? The CEOs read something in some business journal somewhere about this thing, and they're like, oh, we're 100% in, pushing harder and harder on that pendulum, right? So yeah. The 80s. Yeah, the 80s were probably before a lot of you guys, but that's the direction I think we're headed globally. And the interesting thing is, the world's economies used to be more isolated. The world's economies are more global. So, like, things in the US affect the rest of the world more. Things in the UK affect the rest of the world more, right? Things in India affect the rest of the world more. Things in Asia, in Russia, right? The Ukraine, in like all of these things, China, right? They affect the global economy more. It's just, we've become a global economy. And I don't know, it's fascinating. And AI is helping the pendulum swing. Absolutely, Obradors, right? Because the companies that embraced AI as a tool early on started doing better. And the companies that don't understand that and are just following, oh, we read about this CEO who got ridiculous profits because of blah, 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 AI, right? And now we just push. Job market is tough right now. So developers as a whole have less power because they're less, right? Yep, they cannot rehire just as skilled developers. Yes, and the job market is tough. Like, the amount of time I spent searching for a job was like unprecedented for me, right? So from January 17th until I signed my offer, early April, right? I think April 7th was when I signed my offer. That's almost 3 months, right? That was 3 months of stress and just craziness. And the stuff that you're being asked to do now in interviews has gone crazy, right? And that fear causes developers to be more complacent in what's going on. You're 100% correct. I was driven by interest rates that at one point were, yeah, exactly. Can we speak about how being a generalist is generally way more valued than a specialist? I mean, is that because of the idea that a lot of devs are code monkeys, right? About corporate greed and about how trying to get more value instead of valuing true engineering. 3 months was my usual thing as well. Last time it was 1 year. Yeah, definitely things are just bad. Exactly. You know what? We're off topic today, but I like the topic that we're on. Where is where's my Excalibur? So there's this weird idea out there. And you guys have probably experienced it, right? But it's this notion, what you're talking about, Abradores, is this notion of what a lot of people call T-shaped skills, right? And the graph I've seen for T-shapes, or the image that I've seen for T-shaped skills, almost always looks like, oh, what did I do there? That was not what I was intending to do, right? When we talk about T-shaped skills, right? And I'm sure a lot of you guys have been through this discussion before. But this is what you will often see when they start talking about T-shaped skills, right? And the idea of T-shaped skills kind of came out of the DevOps movement, right? So when we started doing DevOps, we started moving away from specialists and back into, way back in the day, programmers were expected to do everything from understanding the hardware, right? Tech support, things like that, right? And then it became apparent that allowing developers and engineers to specialize was good. And so they started specializing. Then we got into DevOps, and DevOps was kind of a return to the old days where engineers were expected to know how to set up CI/CD pipelines. Engineers were expected to know how to deploy. Engineers were expected to know how to troubleshoot, internet gateways, internet applications, things like that, right? And that DevOps was where we got the idea of T-shaped skills, right? And the point of T-shaped skills is that every developer has some piece of knowledge that they go very, very deep on, right? They should be generalists that can go, somewhat deep on some technologies, but they should be able to understand all technologies, and they should be able to go, very, very deeply into, their specialized area. And this makes sense in theory, but it leads to what you're talking about, Abradores, where we value generalists over specialists. And in a lot of cases, generalists perform very, very well, right? Because they're able to think about problems generally instead of in their specialty. Where that starts to break down is, right, suddenly the application that you're serving, right? If we think about it from a front-end point of view, because I tend to draw more front-end developers, but if we think about it from a front-end point of view, suddenly the application that you're serving now serves 10 megabytes of data just to load, right? And your load times are now approaching 10 to 12 seconds. And right now your generalists are starting to show their weakness, right? Because to be able to fix some of these things, we've got to reach this depth, maybe, or this depth, or even this depth of knowledge of, of front end and frameworks and things like that, right? But most of your developers maybe hit this depth, or maybe they're all here, right? And so you don't know how to solve that problem. So you put together Tiger teams, and maybe your Tiger teams can go to this depth, but they still can't hit this depth, or this depth, right? And that's where generalists start to show their problems. And that's where maybe consulting firms that can build up specialists and keep those specialists working, right? So that's why companies tend to value generalists, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, generalists can solve a lot of issues, and being able to go to this depth, or even even this depth can solve like 60 to 70% of your problems, but maybe only 1 to 2% of your problems ever need this depth of knowledge. And that's the that's the issue, right? When we talk about things being bad, I don't want to make people like negative, right? Because um, I'm very much a positive mindset type of person, right? Like I do like to point out problems, but I also like to, and you know, when I'm pointing out problems, I'm more pointing out things that I see before I've had time to think about them, right? And some people don't like that, some people do, but um, stay positive, right? Focus on the things that you can do. Focus on making yourself better, right? Um, you know, be willing to ask yourself when you fail, why did I fail? Right? What caused this failure? And this is the probably the most difficult piece of the entire equation, right? Um, Especially in our industry where imposter syndrome runs rampant, um, and where you're expected to be an expert and you're expected to not fail. um, the most difficult piece is to allow yourself to fail, right? Give yourself that permission, but be honest with yourself about why you failed, right? Like those are the most difficult pieces, and they're the pieces that I struggle with, right? Because you're recognizing that there's a weakness in you, right? And one of the biggest problems I think with society, and we're very philosophical here, right? So please feel free to disagree with me here. um, we're very very philosophical, and these are very very much my opinions, right? But as a society, and this I think is globally true, just from developers and people that I talk to, as a society, failure is so much looked on as a weakness that we don't accomplish things. We're so afraid to fail. Um, the problem that we have when we get into a society where failure is not an option is we don't try new things, right? Because if I fail, whatever bad thing we think will happen, right, it is an option. Um, so we pick the safe route. We don't try new things, right? Because nobody's done this before. Why would I do it? Why would I put myself up to that kind of risk? Um, but we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to fail. And when we fail, we need to be honest with ourselves about that failure. Because once we're honest with ourselves about why we failed, then we can start looking honestly at how we avoid that failure in the future, right? Maybe I didn't know enough, right? So I fix my knowledge gap. Maybe I'm too abrasive as a person, so I start working on my, maybe there's some stuff that I need to go to therapy about, so I go talking to a therapist about it, right? And who knows? Be careful about being too hard on yourself, right? Because it's very very rare that a failure is 100% your own, especially as you get higher up into the leadership. It becomes more and more likely that a failure could be owned by you, right? But the lower in leadership and organization and stuff like that you are, it is incredibly difficult for a failure to be 100% your own, right? As a junior developer, I would say that there is, I don't want to say zero, but the chance of a failure being 100% your own is very, very close to zero, right? There should be controls in place that you should not be able to make a failure that is 100% your own, right? And if you are, then then I would argue that the organization is not properly matured to allow juniors to be able to mature properly, right? Um, so be very, very careful about how hard you are on yourself, but also be honest about things, right? And this is where I struggle, right? Because I'm either too hard on myself, quite often, or maybe I'm not willing to accept the truth, so I'm not willing to be honest with myself or hard enough on myself, right? So it's a difficult balancing act, but yeah. React.js and Nest, that sounds awesome, Obradores. But anyway, this is why we're into generalists, right? Is this T-shaped skills. There's nothing wrong with T-shaped skills, right? But everybody is basically has T-shaped skills, right? Like this is probably my Angular line, right? And this might be my backend line, and this might be, I don't know, my CSS line. Who knows, right? And maybe React is somewhere on this line where I could do it, but I don't do it, so I don't know, right? There's nothing wrong with T-shaped skills. Everybody has T-shaped skills, but it's things are good in moderation. It's when they're taken as a silver bullet that I think things become a problem. Anyway, let's get back to some code because I really need to get my workshop stuff done. But thank you for the questions, and I enjoyed the discussion. One thing I am going to do with this code, because I do not inject things this way ever, but we're going to keep things the same way. We're going to use the inject. So there we go. And I really don't want to use on-init, but we'll use on-init. Really what I would do is I would just do on next render. After next render is what I'm looking for, right? So here I would do this dot load characters, right? This is where I would do the load characters. So, well, for now, it doesn't make sense to keep this around. Oh, this is so beautiful. I don't even want to change it. Oh, this is so beautiful. Oh, wow. Like this is like the Mona Lisa of anti-code. And man, again, right? LLMs only write what they've seen. So here, the LLM was trained on code that does this. Oh, this is so beautiful. So after next render is kind of the replacement for ng on init. And so when you put stuff into your constructor, basically for your object succeed constructing, right? All of that stuff in the constructor has to happen. And one thing to be aware of is with TypeScript, this goes into the constructor, this goes into the constructor, this goes into the constructor, and this goes into the constructor, right? So any assignment that you do on a class property is actually part of the constructor. So even though we don't have an explicit constructor here, we have an implicit constructor with all of this stuff here. So all of this stuff has to happen before the code can succeed. Like inject, I think is fine, right? However, loading characters is an asynchronous action. And it comes down to like how much time do you want to wait for an object to be instantiated versus, you know, if we do this in ng on init, or if we do this in after next render or things like that, it allows us to defer code to allow the constructor to do what it needs to do faster. And then we get a callback that's going to happen when the browser is less busy, right? Like the after next render, we don't know when that render is going to happen, right? The ng on init is a specific hook. And so like moving it to the after next render adds some uncertainty to your code. And it's going to force you to potentially have loading animations or skeletons or something like that, right? But what it isn't going to do is pause the render of your application to greedily do something. Some things that really should be an after next render is things that maybe aren't visible at the time of the page loading, right? What you want is you want that initial page load to be fast for the user, right? They need to see it almost immediately. And this is again places where, you know, you can show your value over LLMs and, you know, AI coding assistants, is you can start talking with the, you know, your PMs and your POs about, hey, you know, let's get the important information to the user right away. What is that information that we get to the user right away? And then what is the stuff that we can load maybe progressively, right? So, you know, what's the stuff that's not as important? Maybe it's stuff below, you know, the fold, as they say, right? The first, you know, anything that's below what they see immediately, we don't need to load that right away. But what that does is it, you know, it takes a lot of pressure off of your constructor. And where this really starts to shine is when you're creating a ton of objects, right? You know, if it takes 30 milliseconds for your constructor to run and it only runs once, well, that's probably not a big deal, right? If it takes 30 milliseconds for your constructor to run and now you're constructing 1,000 objects, well, that's now 30 seconds, right? And so that's where we start getting into, you know, these discussions about, you know, trade-offs. And that's where you can differentiate yourself from, you know, your, I don't want to say competitors, but, you know, your AI is your competitor, right? Where your value starts to really shine is when you, as a person, are able to start bringing these discussions, right? And this does pay off, right? Because there's a whole bunch of studies on human psychology, right? Where the perception of speed outweighs actual speed, right? If I can make you perceive that the page loads in 0.3 seconds, but it actually takes 20 seconds to load everything. Whereas my competitor makes the entire page load 50% faster in 10 seconds, but you perceive that entire 10 seconds, you're going to say that I'm faster, even though I'm not faster, right? It's just the way our brains work and the short circuits and things that, you know, the shortcuts that we take as humans. There's a whole bunch of psychology to this, right? And even then, like if you perceive, like say I take 15 seconds, you take 10 seconds, but my perception of that 15 seconds gives you enough dopamine during that 15 seconds that you're entertained. Your perception of that 15 seconds passing versus the 10 seconds passing, I'm going to win, right? Stop talking about speed. I should be talking about speed. Everybody should be talking about speed, right? And not real speed, but perception of speed, right? When you're talking about front end, it's all down to perception, right? It's why a lot of restaurants put a blue line around their plates, because a whole bunch of research has shown that when there's a blue line around your plate, smaller portions look bigger, right? And there's a whole bunch of psychology that goes into things like that. It's the same way with the way we do stuff for the web. There's a whole bunch of psychology and perception that you can make people think that your site is better than it is, right? And this is awesome. I love this. There's so much wrong with this, and I love it. This was perfect. And yeah, so really putting things into it's like you can tell how long a developer has been in his well, how long a developer has been developing, right? An engineer has been engineering, whatever, right? By when you ask a question like that, Michael, they say it depends, right? And it all comes down to the whole oh, why am I drawing a blank on it right now? Where people with a little bit of knowledge see themselves as being really, really knowledgeable, and then people with a lot of knowledge don't have Dunning-Kruger. That's what I'm thinking of. The Dunning-Kruger effect, right? The more experience you have with things, the more you realize, hey, I don't know a lot, right? So for me to tell you, hey, take all of that stuff out of the constructor and move it into something else is wrong, because I don't have enough information about your specific situation. And that's where the it depends comes in, right? And that's where we start talking about trade-offs, right? Again, it comes down to if it takes you 2 days of work to move all of the stuff in your constructor into like an after next render or something like that, but really that object is only instantiated once, and really it's only 100 milliseconds. Well, you've just spent 2 days of engineering time on 100 milliseconds. Is that worth it? Probably not, right? And what you're doing is probably just fine. On the other hand, right, if that 100 milliseconds is now moved out over 100 items or 200 items, now we're starting to talk about real amounts of time, right? And now that 2 days of engineering can equate to some real benefits to the users, and the user's mental state and things like that. So yeah, and I think if you have task at work to do a feature, and my team leader tries to be too ingenious with the components, and now we have 3 pages. Oh wait, and I think if you have SSR and you do HTTP request in the after next render, yes. Otherwise, it will be cached. Yep, that's also true, Ole. Very, very true, right? And that's another piece, like SSR, SSG are important things to think about. I've been giving a task at work to do a feature, and my team leader tried to be too ingenious with his components. Now we have 3 pages, which is basically just a couple of components, because he wanted to make everything responsible. Yeah, and he didn't check exactly requirements, and it turns out that the complexity of those components is very high. And that's right, the trade-offs, right? And we've talked about the swamp of perfection, where in a perfect world, the way he designed it is probably right, but that swamp drags everybody down, right? I'm not going to say he's right, I'm not going to say he's wrong, but the cost of his decision is measurable, right? And yeah, making 3 components reusable, may not make sense if those three components are ever only used in conjunction with another component. That's another piece that, yeah, it took me one day and the complexity is now so bad. Like, good luck. Yeah, yeah, I totally get you, Abradores. 100% agree. Man, what a mess. And actually, we're ahead of where we wanted to be with Junie. Junie actually wrote code that I am so happy with because this code is difficult to test. So we're ahead of where I wanted to be. Thank you, Junie, for that. And you know, we're kind of dunking on LLMs today, but let's be 100% honest with ourselves here. The reason this code exists, and this is hideous code, I want to be 100%. You know, there's a whole bunch, like we're leaking subscriptions here. Where if there aren't, man, there's just so much that's wrong with this, and it's awesome, and I love it. But this is more a reflection of us as an industry than it is a reflection of the AI tool. And what do I mean by that? Well, the AI tool had to learn this somewhere, right? It was trained on a large data set. Like, this isn't Junie's fault. I'm not gonna blame this on Junie. The LLM that it used, that was, you know, trained on code, saw enough code like this that this is right. It's like, oh yeah, this is the way we do this, right? And what a beautiful mess. But this is actually the component I was envisioning. I actually thought we were going to have to break this code some more. But the more I look at it, the more perfect it is. Because it's going to lead into my discussion. The discussion that we're going to have on Thursday is how we can write code that will either force us into patterns like this or into patterns that are testable. Right? And this is perfect. So let's write our unit tests for this, and then let's show where our unit tests fall apart, right? So one of the first things I want to do is just make sure that we recognize that unit tests are not the right way to test this component. That's the first wrong decision we're making. And I want to call that out really, really at the beginning. Our first decision, the wrong decision, is to unit test a component. And the reason that unit testing a component is wrong is that when you unit test, you want to isolate everything but what you're testing. And we're going to see why that's wrong here in a second. But the code is written so perfectly that the state is intermingled with the component, right? We've got amazing lines of code like this. Like, this is so beautiful. I don't even know. Like, I don't even know if I would have come up with this one on my own, but wow, way to go. And you know, there's some other beautiful things like race conditions introduced by this. Like, the amount of work that it would take to test this code is amazing. And I love it. I love it on so many levels. So, oh wow, this is beautiful. So let's get our unit tests up and going, right? So here we're going to that, and we're going to add the watch flag to it, right? Because we want to make sure that all of our unit tests pass, right? That's our goal. right? When we write unit tests, our goal is to make sure they all pass, right? From a oh, can I not run everything? Um, but our goal is to make sure that they all pass. Um, right now, they're not all passing, and we can see that if we take the watch flag off, right? So we're going to take the watch flag off, and we'll see that our unit tests failed to pass. Boom, right? Um, and the reason that they're failing is because of the NX welcome component. Let's go ahead and add our watch flag back on. And let's go open our unit tests, right? And I'm actually extremely happy with Junie. And the reason that I'm saying that is because it allowed us to get into the testing right away, and not having to build the application that we're going to use to test. And it did it in such a way that I'm happy to start here as our testing point, right? So let's jump into our test here. And we can fix this by, boom, pulling that out. And pulling that out. And guess what? Our tests probably pass. Nope, they didn't. So this test is actually a bad test, but we can talk about that later. Wait, how did our title? Oh, we're actually grabbing the H1. Okay. I actually like this because this allows us to show some problems with unit testing, right? So that's fine. And the other one should pass. So there we go. We're done. Perfectly done. All of our tests pass. And now we can commit this code and we're good to go, right? And this, like, this is actually more than you would see in most like most things I've seen is you should create the app. Yeah. Like this is the most common. This is the most common test I've seen, and the rest of this stuff is not here, right? So these tests are actually not good. Um, um, what else AI tools you are using? Because for now, I'm mostly on ChatGPT. Maybe need something else like Copilot or Cursor. Copilot, like I have Copilot. I'm actually not happy with Copilot. I'm thinking about moving to Cursor. Everybody's saying Cursor is way better. What is this? Oh, wow. Wait, what is this? It's using that. So Junie in WebStorm has been pretty amazing. I've been playing with it for a while, um, and it's been pretty amazing. Cursor, I think, beats Copilot. ChatGPT is pretty good at code. I'm hearing just from various people that Google actually beats ChatGPT in code right now. Um, so if you're using ChatGPT, maybe compare it to the output you get from from Google's AI, and like I like to play with my own LLMs, Ole, but yeah, like Cursor or ChatGPT or I mean GitHub are nice. GitHub is less exciting to me than Cursor, but I haven't tried Cursor yet. So I do use GitHub Copilot, and it does what I need it to do. But I also don't let um, I don't let AI write a lot of code for me, and maybe that's just me being old school. But I just don't want to turn off that part of my brain. So I want to review the code that it writes. So Copilot seems to work for me. Um, Tools like this, like the service powered type engine, are impressive to me, right? Where um, they're using the internal IDE model, but then they're supplementing it with a language service to make type inference better. Like that's hugely, like a tool like that is way more important to me than a tool that can write code. Um, so I love tools like this, and Junie like is like a workflow AI. Like workflow AIs are impressive to me, um, and where I think more time will be spent. So um, like Junie, this tool, and then just whatever tool like Claude, or not Claude, but like Cursor or Copilot will be good. Abralor asks, let me ask you a spicy question: is not knowing how to unit test as a senior engineer, is it okay? Um, Man, I don't. Everybody's different, right? Is it okay? Sure, why not, right? Like where your value lies, you understand better than me. But I will say that if you want to take your coding to the next level, understanding how to test is way more important than you might think. Um, and the reason for that is that once you start testing, you start thinking about your components and your application differently. And you start looking at things as being compositional, right? Being composable, um, because you need to be able to test them. You need to be able to compose things. Um, like if we go back to what I want to talk about, um, right? Um, there is, right? Like the discussion I want to have revolves around, what people might call um, flashlight or a torch, right? And the reason that I think this is an important discussion to have when we talk about testing, and even about the total cost um, of ownership um, of software, is when we look at this, right? We've got um, the components that make up our flashlight or torch, right, are a couple of batteries, usually, right? There's this mechanism here in the switch, right? And the switch usually has something that then allows our light bulb here to emit light, right? Which means these should probably be green, right? So if we look at a flashlight and we look at testing a flashlight, there's really only a few things that we need to test, right? There's this switch piece here that allows the power from the batteries to make it to the light bulb, right? So if this fails in any way, no power will flow to the light bulb, right? There's the light bulb itself, right? And if this fails, then even, the power is not going to cause it to emit light. And then there's the batteries, right? And if the batteries fail, then no power is generated. And so, right? So there's really three components here. And these three components operate independently of each other. And if I'm a light bulb manufacturer, I don't care about how the internals of my batteries work, right? If I'm the flashlight manufacturer, I work on this switch component here. I don't really care how my batteries or my light bulb works, right? This could be LED, it could be whatever, right? And as a battery manufacturer, I don't even care that I'm using a light, like a flashlight, right? I could be put into any number of things to provide power, right? And the thing is that, like, we can test these batteries, right? So if I suspect, and I would be right to suspect that most likely the batteries are the wrong problem, right? So I can use a battery tester and say, oh yeah, maybe this battery isn't providing enough charge, right? So I can easily replace that battery, and the entire flashlight works again, right? But I'm able to test and figure out, which pieces aren't working, and then fix those pieces, right? Same thing with the light bulb. I could test the light bulb some other way to see if the light bulb generates light. And then I know it's either the battery or the switch that's the problem if the light bulb generates light. If it's not, then I can replace the light bulb, right? And the entire flashlight works again, right? The switch is more problematic, right? And it's more difficult to test. Probably the easiest way to test it would be to find, a flashlight that works, that accepts the same size batteries and the same bulb, and then test those components, right? Well, I can test the batteries, and I can test the bulb however I test them, right? Like if I know the bulb works and I know the batteries work, then really it's this switch mechanism, right? That's my problem. And this is the way we can look at, I would just buy a new, right? And that's our consumer, mindset that we've been taught to have working, right? So I thought adding Tailwind to my skill set meant taking my skills to the next level, or at least that's what Twitter said. Tailwind is good. I like Tailwind. Right. Well, it sounds like too much hassle for a flashlight, but this is my analogy that I want to use, right? What's wrong with this code, right? Outside of like race conditions and subscribing in the middle to fill an array and things like that, right? What's wrong with this code? Well, this code is kind of like the opposite of a flashlight, right? And it's our smartphones, right? If the battery fails on a smartphone, how do I test it? Right? If one of the switches or buttons on my smartphone fails, how do I test it? Right? My smartphone is kind of the opposite of flashlight, and it's like the ultimate consumerism thing, right? Because we're paying like, I don't know, in the US for like an iPhone, you're at like $700, right? For a flashlight, you can probably pick up a flashlight, like a cheap flashlight for $5, right? In the scheme of things, Obradores is probably right. The flashlight could probably be built more like the iPhone, right? Because the total cost of replacing the flashlight is $5. But with our phones, like an iPhone or an Android phone, the total cost of replacing a broken phone is like $700, right? So making this a consumerism, thing that we can't mess with the batteries or anything on. And this is the way a lot of software is written. The way our software here, like our application is written right now, is like the iPhone, right? Everything exists in one place. It's really, really hard to isolate one piece from the other piece. And if we want to replace this component, it's best to just throw out everything and replace it all, right? The flashlight is way cheaper to replace. It's way cheaper to maintain, right? It's not doing the same stuff, right? So, there's obviously a disparity there. But the point is, if I don't like this mechanism, right? Like if I don't like my flashlight, the body itself, maybe I want to upgrade to a mag light to get, be able to change the beam intensity or whatever. I can most likely take my bulb and my batteries, buy, another replacement body, put those things in it, and, I've replaced the core business logic, right, with pieces that can be easily replaced, right? With a phone, that's not the case, right? And, this may not be the best analogy because, again, like a phone's doing way more stuff than the flashlight, but it's not like I could take my battery and maybe my screen from this phone and put it on another phone. That's not possible, right? It's a consumer piece of plastic that when it's broken, you throw it in the garbage and you go get a new one, right? Which is horrible. It's like a horrible statement to make, and I hate making that statement, but that's kind of the truth. And that's the way that I think about software anymore, right? We want our software to be more like the flashlight or more like the Honda Civic than we do like the iPhone or the Lotus vehicle, right? Anybody can work on a Honda Civic. A Honda Civic's cheap to maintain, cheap to own, right? A Lotus, very expensive car, very expensive to maintain, very expensive to own, right? If we're creating software like this, we're creating software that's expensive for the organization to own, things like that. And that's the problem that we've got with the software the way it's written. I want my Honda Civic to be more like a flashlight. That's what I learned from this stream. Exactly. You want your Honda Civic to be more like a flashlight, right? You want to be able to replace any part in the Honda Civic at any point in time with an equivalent part and have it work. And that's why Honda Civics are so popular in street racing, right? Because there are so many parts in the Honda Civic that you can take out and replace with something better, and your car is better, instantly better. There aren't that many cars out there that are in that same boat, right? Where you've got a fairly inexpensive car that you can replace and upgrade and turn it into a better car. There are a lot of cars that you can upgrade, like most cars, right? But to the degree and level that a Honda Civic can be, there's a reason that you see Honda Civics at almost every racing event you go to. They're cheap and they're easy to get into, and you can get good results by just understanding and replacing parts. And that's the same way that I think about software, right? We want our software to be cheap and easy to maintain, but we want parts that can easily be upgraded and replaced to improve the performance of our software. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of the testing stuff here. But let's add some tests, right? Because I will tell you that I've seen a lot of applications where this would be enough testing for this application to pass. And the crazy thing is that we've probably got, I don't know, what's our coverage on this? I would be willing to bet that we're probably around, I would bet 60 to 70% coverage on this, because the coverage is only going to be counting this stuff. And this is calling this, and right. And so our test coverage is probably pretty good. What would you do if you had a couple of experienced developers who cannot even perform at a junior level? I mean, people who do not even respond when you write to them. They do not take accountability of their work and try to create drama. Um, that's a toxic situation. And are you talking about me as kind of like in a manager capacity, or are you talking about like me in a peer level capacity where I'm a senior at their level, or are you talking about me as a junior who is, technically below them? Because I think this is a serious question, um, and I can answer it from all 3 points of view. You as another dev, um, so as a peer, um, it really depends. In today's job market, I would start talking to your managers and to HR, and I would start documenting. I asked them on this date. I still haven't heard from them. Right. I would start documenting that. I would also just start documenting a whole bunch of things, because the one thing that you're going to need when talking to like HR is a paper trail. Right. Start creating that paper trail and start talking to your manager, and don't go to your manager to complain. That's the number one. Um, yeah, the only person I can trust is one of those dev on the team who is the team leader. And see, that's a very toxic workplace to be in, and that's going to burn you out. Um, you need to go to your management and start talking to them about how it's affecting you, right? As a developer, I cannot get my job done because of this, and this, right? I need this, and this to happen, right? For me to be able to be effective at my job. Don't go to them and just be like, hey, developer X over there doesn't answer my stuff and blah, blah, blah. That's never going to end well, because you're going to be seen as a complainer. You don't want to be a complainer, especially in today's job market. Um, you need to show, hey, right, on this ticket that I'm struggling with, developer X was pointed out as an expert. I approached developer X on this day, right? The next day I approached them again. The next day I approached them again. Yesterday I approached them 3 times. I haven't heard anything. This is affecting my ability to complete this ticket, right? What can I do to get help from developer X, right? And now you're not complaining about developer X not doing their job. Now you're going to your leadership and you're showing a very real problem that can be measured, right? You're measuring it and you're providing metrics, and you're showing that your work is suffering because of choices made by somebody else. And now it's a management problem to solve. It's not your problem to solve. And that's my best piece of advice for dealing with situations like that, where one, if it's not impacting you, it's really, really hard for you to solve that problem, right? As soon as it starts impacting you, now you can solve it, right? And then if it's more toxic than that, then that's where, like, I understand U.S. laws and things like that, where hostile work environment and stuff. Like, I don't understand like EU and other countries' laws. I wouldn't be a good person to give that kind of advice. So, um, my team leader handles all this stuff, and I guess I'm lucky that I can be frank with him, and he already knows that those things are happening, and he is starting to get pissed as well, and that's good, right? Because your team leader is in charge of the team, and he's seeing that it's impacting you, and you've been going about it the right way. You've been going to your team leader and allowing your team leader to solve the issue. If your team leader has to constantly solve the issue, they're going to start looking for more and more creative solutions. And your team leader may start going to managers or PMs or people like that and just be like, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what I'm having to do to solve these problems, right? And especially in today's market, like I can't remember. There's the notion of the flower that grows too tall is the one that's cut first, right? Um, in today's job market, making sure, right? It's not that you don't want to be the best or you don't want to be right, but what you don't want to be is the flower that's loudly screaming about other flowers, right? You don't want to be the one that stands out. So in today's job market, you're definitely going to want to follow the chain of command. You're going to want to be respectful of your leaders, because your leaders are the ones who are ultimately going to make the decisions, right? And if you're constantly complaining about them or to them or things like that, you're going to be seen as a problem and something to be replaced. So yeah, that's my advice. From a management point of view, the number one thing that's going to destroy team morale is the exact thing that you've discussed. And that's something that you solve immediately. As soon as it comes to your attention, you figure it out. Because the thing you don't want to do is destroy team morale, especially right now where resources are being slashed because of AI, right? You don't want to lose resources because of internal conflict or toxicity. So yeah. The only real complaint I have is that I'm always working more than other people who are even higher in terms of rank. For some reason, I am seen as a person who will do any kind of work, even bad work. The task that was done wrong by my team leader was thrown on me. Yeah, well, team morale is already low, or at least my morale. And so here's the thing. It's not lost on people that you are the one that you give difficult tasks to. And it is a grind, right, when you're in that position. But I will tell you right now that when a round of layoffs comes around and I've got one person who I can count on to always solve difficult tasks and another person who does whatever they do, I'm going to try and hang on to the person who does difficult tasks. Yeah. And here's the other thing, right? Is as you're thinking about potentially moving on, think about how you create that narrative around what you've done for the company, right? So when you're creating your resume, right, instead of saying that I did this, this, and this, you say, I did this task, I did this task, I did this task. This allowed me to be known as the developer who would solve difficult problems, right? The developer who would solve difficult problems looks amazing on a resume, right? Even though you're down in the trenches and fighting fires and it sucks, but you can say, I did, we had this failure. The team lead gave it to me. I solved it, and this was the outcome. We had this failure. I solved it. This was the outcome. We had this failure. I solved it. This was the outcome. This allowed me to become somebody that the team relied on to solve difficult problems. That is an impactful line in a resume, right? And it's not about getting fired. And I did phrase it that way, but you're not working in isolation. I guarantee that your team lead is talking about you to his managers. His managers are like, oh yeah, the thing that the team lead messed up, he gave it to Obradores solved it, right? So your name is being mentioned higher and higher. And when it comes time for like promotions or salary considerations or things like that, um, you're being discussed because you're solving problems, right? Like being in the trenches can often suck, right? Fighting fires can probably suck. Your team leaders, oh man, your team leader's sabotaging you. Oh, that's a different situation, and that sucks. But you're still not in a bad situation. Like people, like even if he's not talking about you, his manager knows that he screwed up and he gave that task to you, right? Um, and that's the one thing that's important to not lose sight of. Um, is the work that you do is going to be noticed. And sometimes you have to do some self promotion to get it noticed. There's nothing wrong with promoting yourself in meetings and being like, yeah, I solved that. Yeah, I solved that. Yeah, I did that. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. That will often help you get ahead. Um, so there's nothing wrong with taking the difficult tasks and solving them. Just make sure that the difficult tasks you're taking are the ones that are leveraging the project better. Right? Don't take on difficult tasks because they're difficult. Take on difficult tasks that make the product better, and that will be noticed. You know. Yeah, exactly. Um, and like that's not your problem, right? Like your team leader needs to solve the issue of the guy not responding for 6 hours, right? And maybe your team lead doesn't have the ability to do that for whatever reason, but that's definitely not your problem, right? Let's test some things about this component, right? um, One thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that the characters are loaded, right? um, so um, let's see what this test does. Yeah, so this is a test. This is a good test, right? To show us our race condition here. Um, this one should probably fail. Well, maybe it won't. We can make it fail. Oh no, it did fail. Right? Um, and the reason it failed, um, do I know any good Nest.js developers? I don't know that many Nest.js developers. I like Nest. Um, even pay if it's good. I really like Nest. I don't know that many Nest.js developers. Um, I would go. I would go maybe create an issue on the Nest.js site. Just be like, hey, um, I'm looking for somebody to review my code. Can somebody recommend somebody to me? And then mention, I'm willing to pay. Yeah, Nest.js is really cool. I really like Nest.js. I just haven't had the time to really learn it, and haven't had the need to. Um, like the Angular Dynos project we did was done in Nest, and I really enjoyed working in Nest. There were some things that I didn't like about it, but uh, it had more to do with the way that Angular has changed and less to do with how Nest works. Um, like Nest.js is really, really similar to .NET for me. Um, so yeah, I really enjoyed Nest quite a bit. Um, but let's talk about this test, right? Um, and why does this test fail? Um, well, the reason that this test fails is, well, we could probably do um, fixture.detect changes, and now it will pass. No. So the reason that this doesn't work And we could do this with like a fake async here. Come on. There we go. And so now, because we've got a fake async, now we can tick for, I don't know, 100 milliseconds, right? And now it's going to pass. Right, so now it passes. Oh, wait, what? Oh, the fixture.detect changes worked. How many milliseconds do we need to wait for? But basically, oh, you know what? I probably need to call. No, the create component should be calling the on and init. But we've got a race condition here. And that's our problem. Is just a fake async good enough to do it? No. Okay. But if fixture.detect changes is enough to do it, yeah. And this is a problem, right? Because having to call fixture.detect changes causes all sorts of issues, right? We shouldn't have to call this manually. And one thing I want to do is right, I want to call this out that check fake async for the workshop because we saw that doesn't work, right? And we would expect it to work because we're dealing with observables here, right? And we're subscribing and the all characters. But there's a problem here. And the other thing we could do is we could go async here, right? And then instead of this, we could do a set timeout, right? And we could put like 10 milliseconds on here. I think even 0 would be enough. But what that's going to do is move us to the next change detection cycle in our test, right? And now we pass, right? And the reason we pass comes down to change detection cycles. And we've made a mess of our code by doing this right here, and that's why it's so beautiful. Because when we tick, we're actually, so the way observables are written is when we do fake async, we can change the scheduler for the observable, but the subscribe still is running on the next change detection cycle. And so to get the subscribe to work, we're doing a set timeout, and that is so beautiful that I want to leave it in place because our tests pass, but not because they should. Well, they pass because they should, but not because the code is good, but because we've messed around with our testing, right? And the other one we should have is it should have a list of top characters, right? Um, and like this should fail too. Um, yeah, right. So we fail here, but we can make this one async. And there's a whole bunch of terrible stuff with this test, and I love it. Um, like so many terrible things with this test. And I love that we're forced to write tests like this because of because of the way we've written our code. Um and like showing details, like honestly I'm gonna punt on this one because writing the test for this is non-trivial. Um and the amount of code coverage I'm gonna get is one line. Which isn't going to affect my code coverage metrics, and that's where, um, which also means that because I chose that, I'm not going to test this because I'm not going to get code coverage on this, right? And I'm not going to get code coverage on my description. My description has problems too, right? Well, I love that we're using ngIf. That's actually really cool. And we're using ng4. I definitely wouldn't have done that, but maybe we'll clean that up. I actually need to end. Actually, let's clean this up because this is kind of hideous. So we want an @for. So we're gonna let top, or we're gonna let character of top characters. Um, so it's @for character of characters. What doesn't like my? Oh yeah. And then I also need a track by, right? Yeah. So we're gonna track character dot ID. There we go. Now we're gonna take this div. We're gonna move it into here. So there we go. So there's my 4. And we'll do the same here. We're going to do @for character of all characters, track ID. And we're going to track this TR, which means we can remove this ng4 here. Boom. And there's an ngIf here, so we can just do an @if selected character dot description. There's that one. Now there shouldn't be any NG. Oh, there's an NG if there. There are no more NG4, but there is an NG if there. So here we can just do at if select a character. Boom. So there we go. So now we've got an application that's only partially tested. It's going to show good testing metrics. But the tests aren't good. The tests that we have don't really test anything useful. And we can do better. So I won't be streaming tomorrow because tomorrow's my first day of work and I'm not sure what my day is going to look like. But I'll let everybody know I need to get the fixed version of this written so that we can compare the two and show how making different choices can make our application better. Yeah, thank you guys for everybody for being here. It was a fun stream. A lot of philosophical discussions today. Luckily, Junie did most of the work for us, so we're still on target. But yeah, looking forward to finishing this up. Thursday is when I will be presenting the workshop. So yeah, you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you later.